welcome back to this edition of Redemption from Death Row, where I talked to Bill Noguera. I took a couple weeks off from getting in contact with him just because I had a lot of other stuff going on. But today we're going to talk about Betsy Aardsma. Now, this case I'm very familiar. I shouldn't say very familiar. I'm familiar with. Betsy was murdered, I believe, November 28th, 1969, in Penn State Library, the Penn State campus, the University of Penn State and State College, Pennsylvania, where I hung out all the time. Not that particular library, although I have been in it. I used to hang out at State College. I lived in a small town called Center Hall. So Center Hall was probably 25 minutes maybe from State College, and that's where we would go. That's where the arcade was, Playland and Campus Casino. And then when I got older, we even went there to go to the bars. The Rathskeller was a big bar up there. So many, it's college town. And I'm a Penn State fan, always have been. Penn State football, Joe Paterno, John Cappelletti, my favorite Penn State player. But, I could name hundreds. Paul Pelesny and LeVar Arrington, just linebacker every linebacker that went there. Shane Conlon. I just always had an affinity for. But I always knew about this case of the young lady getting stabbed and killed in the library. It's a case that I want to take on more in depth. As in, I want to go up to the crime scene. I want to interview people. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But when I mentioned to Bill about this case, because I think I did a Crux Zero, a newspaper article reading about this case, he said that he would, like to take a look at it and do whatever he wants to do and give his analysis. And, yeah, I'm good with that. So that's what we're going to do today. Bill's going to take a look at it, see what he thinks. And again, people that are closed-minded, that can't look at what I am trying to do here as a professional, it's very important. I had other professionals, quote-unquote professionals, say, why would you, and they wouldn't say this to me, they'd say it to each other, but I heard it. It got back to me. Why would you go to somebody on death row to get your information? We don't go to those type of people. I just shake my head. Did you ever work a case in your life? I've used informants my whole career. That's what you do. If you are so egocentric that you think I'm the only one that has the answers, you're not a professional. You have to look outside the box and get different perspectives. That's how you solve cases. And for me, to get the insight from somebody that has killed, I'll do it every day and twice on Sunday. That's just the way it is. And if you don't like it, don't watch. It doesn't bother me one bit. But it helps me. It gives me insights and allows me to look at things through the lens of a convicted murderer. So that's what we're going to do today on Redemption from Death Row. So I'll come back after I'm done with Bill, after he gives his assessment, and go from there. So thanks for watching. Here's Bill Noguera. All right, welcome back to Redemption from Death Row. We're here with Bill Noguera. Today we're going to talk about a very old case, and it might be the oldest one that me and Bill have discussed. He could correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's the murder of Betsy, I believe I pronounce it right, Aardsma, from Penn State University. And I'm familiar with this case because that's where I grew up. I spent my time at Penn State University, State College area. So this was like one of those mysterious cases that everybody kind of knew about, especially cases or people like me that were into that kind of stuff. So I was in that library. I also am, again, familiar with the case, but not all the particulars. I plan on looking at this case in the future. So with Bill looking at it first and giving his opinion on it, it won't bias me one way or another, because I can disagree with Bill. I don't have a problem with that, and he doesn't have a problem with that either. But for the most part, we do agree on things, and we'll see if we end up agreeing on this case in the future. But let's get his thoughts on Betsy. Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you and do your thing.
Well, hey, thank you so much. But yeah, like you, Penn State, as we discussed, is like my football team, the Nittany Lions, Joe Paterno and all that. And of course, there was a bit of, scandal towards the end of his tenure there as the head coach. I also knew about this case. I've never been on the campus, nor have I been in that library as you have. But yes, the case is something that has, been, it's kind of that old thing that if you live in a certain town or you really follow that team, you always hear about things on those campuses. And this is the case that you always hear about the young woman who was murdered in the, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Pattee Library at Penn State University. So with no further ado, I'll launch into this case and give particulars about the early life of Betsy Aardsma, as well as the actual day and the events leading up to her murder. So Betsy Aardsma is a 22-year-old graduate student, and she was murdered at Pattee Library at Penn State. It was one stab wound to the left side of her breast, and she died shortly after because the knife penetrated a ventricle, I believe, a ventricle part of her heart, as well as an artery. So, early life. And there's a reason why I'm going into her early life here, and I'm sure Ken will correct me if I'm wrong, is we always look for factors of risk. Was the person in a high-risk lifestyle? And we can refer to possibly people who are sex workers or drug dealers or people involved in crime in some way, shape, or form. So I always look at the victim themselves to see what type of lifestyle they had, and could that lifestyle have led to the events leading to their murder. I'm sure that a lot of detectives do the same work. So she is the second of four kids. She was born in Holland, Michigan. Her parents are Ether and Richard Aardsma. They're middle-class conservative folks. And their father was a sales tax auditor for the Michigan State Treasurer. Mother was a housewife. Betsy was a good student. She graduated from honors in 1965 from Holland High School, and then she enrolled in Hope College, where she had aspirations to be a physician. In 1967, she enrolled at the University of Michigan and graduated again with honors in 1969. She wanted to join the Peace Corps and travel to Africa, but enrolled at Penn State because her boyfriend at the time, David Wright, was a medical student, and from what I understand, he could not guarantee that he would stay in the relationship if she left and was gone for a long period of time. So she decided to actually go to the same school as her boyfriend. She lived on campus at Atherton Hall. Her roommate was Sharon Brent, and was known to be kind of a homebody. She studied all the time. She was very concerned with her academic reputation, and in all accounts was a good kid, good family, good boyfriend, and that is really where we are in terms of...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, you are the detective here and have spent a number of years investigating victims. Her lifestyle and everything about it, conservative background, good student, honor student, leads me to believe that there is nothing in her life or lifestyle or family's lifestyle that would put her in a risk category in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it seems like from what you said and from what I recall, she's a low risk victim for sure. But you and I both know that if she's attractive and in a college town, sometimes that elevates the risk, unfortunately, because of the society we live in. So we have to look at that too. But before we get into that, you said she graduated with honors, I believe, in 1969. So when was the date of this murder? What year?
It was November 1969. She had just been at Penn State about 8 weeks.
Okay. So, and she was there for her grad degree?
She was.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. I wrote those down. I wanted to make sure. But yeah, low risk victim. And we don't know what her, party lifestyle would be. You said she's a homebody, studied from what you said with honors and stuff like that. Yeah, it would seem like she would be somebody who would stay home and study. But you have to cross out certain things. One would be any partake in the drug world, which there doesn't seem to be an indication of that. But as a detective, that's something you want to cross off so that way it's just out there and you can get rid of that. Also parties. I'd want to know if she was accustomed to going to frat parties.
Call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Because if you go to some of those parties and, you get shut down, sometimes that could make for a violent person or a violent outburst. And those are things that I want to look at initially as well. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I kind of, while I was reading this case and studying it, I was imagining those specific scenarios because you and I covered the Idaho murders, and you had, again, 4 students that were murdered, and they were good students, good kids, good family. There was really low risk factors. Yet, of course, this guy who killed them, just focused on one of them. And sure, we're now in the 2022 era rather than 1969, but the same perpetrators exist. We have the same type of people, so very easily somebody could have done this to her who just focused on her one day and was following her. Although, we'll get into this later, I don't believe that to be the case. I don't believe that she was stalked, and I don't believe that she attracted a particular predator because of her looks or because of just the fact that these people sometimes you say hello to them and they begin to imagine there is a relationship going on. And I'll explain why I believe that. So let's get into the murder itself and what happened that day leading up to her unfortunate murder. So on the afternoon of November the 28th, 1969, Betsy and her roommates left their room, and Betsy's intention was to actually visit the Pattee Library at Penn State because she had fallen behind on a paper and she wanted to review and study for it. They did part ways prior to the university campus library because, one was going to the library, one had other plans, but they did agree to meet up later to watch the movie Easy Rider or take the money and run. So about 4 p.m., she enters the library and she speaks to her professor, a young man by the name of Nicholas Jokowski. And they briefly speak, and then she then again speaks to 2 other friends, a Linda Marce and Robert Stenberg, before she actually enters the library itself. She then enters, she places her purse, her jackets, and a book inside of a locker, which I believe is a locker. They mention a different name, but I think it's a different era, and they think of lockers or stationary places for your clothes or coat rack. that's assigned to her. So I say locker. It could be a different name, but it's initially the same deal. Then she walks towards the card catalog where she researches. Remember, this is prior to the internet. Back then, you couldn't jump on a computer, hit a particular book, it searches for it, and you know exactly what aisle is in. In this time and era, they had these cards, and you'd kind of flip through it, find the book, or at least the type of book in that particular category or subject matter, and then you would find a card that leads you specifically to that particular aisle in the library. She does this, and she finds what she's looking for, and she walks down a flight of stairs into the level 2 core stack, approximately around 4:20, between 4:20 and 4:30 in that afternoon. A few minutes later, after she has seen an assistant supervisor, he believes that she sees her speaking to 2 young men. This supervisor, by the name of Richard...
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Well, let me call back, and I'll continue with what we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay,
go ahead. You were talking about Richard being the professor or somebody that saw her talking to 2 young men?
Well, actually, the person who saw them talking was an assistant supervisor at the library. His name was Dean Burgart, and I apologize if I got his name wrong. And he was the one who saw her speaking to 2 young men. Then about 10 minutes later, Richard Allen, who I believe was a student, overheard a conversation in that general direction, and he suddenly heard a metallic crashing noise. And a young man who he described as looking like a student ran past him urgently. When this all happens, of course, you know, a crashing sound, library, people look, they don't know what's going on. No one immediately thinks, wow, someone was stabbed to death or anything to that matter. But in fact, Betsy was, in fact, already, when that sound happened, in dire need of medical attention because she was actually dying. She was standing between row 50 and 51 in the stacked building of the Pattee Library when she fell. The wound severed her pulmonary artery and then pierced her right ventricle. As she fell, she pulled several books and shelves down. 2 students, and again, I apologize for the name, Jao Ufandi and Marley Erdley, saw a man run from where Betsy lay, and he said to them, that girl needs help. He is described as an individual wearing khaki slacks, a tie, and a sports jacket. They said he was groomed very well, and that is significant because at that time, 1969, 1970, around that area, was the whole era where long hair was coming in. So you don't expect to find that too much at Penn State University, especially in a graduate school, Penn State, or in that area. So that is significant in itself. The individual was 6 feet tall, about 185 pounds, and may have been wearing glasses. He actually led them to Betsy, and then Jao Ufandi saw the individual leaving the library urgently and gave chase to him, but was outrun. So that right there in itself, it caught my attention immediately, and the reason being is because you have 2 individuals, and you know that eyewitness accounts are probably the worst in the world because people see 2 different things, especially when they're excited, something traumatic happens. So that they were not able to come back and identify the person in a lineup because they had several different suspects, and they could have come in and really discounted or said, that's not the guy. if I see an individual and he's telling me something like that individual needs help, and he leads me to somebody who's on the floor, I'm always taking note of this, and maybe it's just me, maybe it's just you too, but I would have looked at the person, and I would remember that person. Nevertheless, Ederle starts giving CPR, including mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and they make a phone call to the medical center at Penn State. But they tell the person a young woman has fainted. Now, of course, we're thinking, how does somebody mistake someone who's dying from a stab wound to someone fainting? And the reason being is because she was wearing a red sleeveless dress. She had a turtleneck on. It was cold outside. And when the people told someone fainted, they said, if someone fainted, they're not looking for anything else. She had also urinated in the vicinity. So that kind of told people, well, look, maybe she fainted. She lost control of her bodily functions, and that's what's happening. So it wasn't until they get her, actually, which took time to get there. You say someone fainted, you're not in that much of a hurry to get to that place, as opposed to if someone says someone has been stabbed and they're dying. So they were giving mouth-to-mouth and giving her CPR when, in fact, they find that there is a little bit of blood. One of the students who was a medical student realizes that there's blood. He takes off her part of her dress, opens her, and finds that she has a puncture wound. Immediately, he orders them to stop performing CPR, and then he begins to administer what he believed and medical people believe is life-saving procedures. Unfortunately, she was pronounced dead 5 minutes later, and they believe that she actually died 5 minutes after the stab wound. So while she's being transported is when she was deceased, and she died. And when she got to the hospital, there's nothing they could do to her because she bled out inside the cavity of her chest. So that is really basically what happened that day. If you have anything to say about that or comment, Ken, I'd love to hear it because I have a few ideas regarding this whole situation.
Well, a couple of things that stand out to me. Number one, if a guy gave chase and he got outran, I mean, that kind of narrows down the pool to me. There was no reason. Well, I guess there's always a reason. Could be the guy had warrants and he doesn't want involved in anything. But, I mean, I think any reasonable person could say, well, if you're running from the scene like that and somebody's giving chase and you're still running, then you have something to do with that crime. Number two, something that really stands out to me, and I would have to take some time to think about this, but the time of day sticks out to me. Now, 4:30 in the afternoon, that's atypical from when a crime of passion, murder may happen, and especially in a library like that. So, but not necessarily. I mean, that's not foolproof, but that stood out to me. So those were the two things.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
So go ahead.
Yeah, and you're quite right about that. Yeah, no, absolutely. You're quite right about that. And time is a very big factor for me as well. So I focused on that Richard Allen, as well as other witnesses, said they overheard her speaking in that general vicinity. It could have been somebody else, but it seems to be her with two individuals. And shortly after, we're talking about seconds, maybe a minute later, they hear the crashing, a clanking sound of, that could have been the books falling, the case falling, but these cases are not like today. We have metal shelves. This was a wooden shelves. The clanking could have been the knife, although no knife was ever recovered from what I have read. And they looked, they asked, they searched the entire campus, they found no knife. But because of the proximity of time, it leads me to at least focus on the two individuals she was talking to as being, one of them being the perpetrator. Because it was a single stab wound, you know, her boyfriend was a medical student. So if we were looking at the way people thought back in the day when Jack the Ripper was doing things and he was slicing at women with precision, there would be people that are immediately focused and say, well, you know, look, come on, Bill, it's a very easily called situation. You have a medical student and a boyfriend. Look, everything seemed to be fine with them. Her diaries did not indicate any kind of problems. She was committed to him. He was committed to her. There's no problems here. But, you know, at a moment's notice, he could have, you know, asked her for something, to do something. She didn't want to. He got upset. He could have stabbed her. And look, he's a medical student. He would know exactly how to stab to kill somebody. Yes, check. You're absolutely correct. However, it's not the boyfriend. This had nothing to do with that young man. Mr. Wright is an innocent person, and this had nothing to do with him. The person who ran from the scene, I believe, is the perp. There was two of them. And I believe that one of them, actually, when this happened, tried to help her. And I know this because you have one witness chasing an individual, the one that said, this girl needs help, running one way. Yet there are droplets leading down the stairs of the third level, which is where the other perp ran. The two guys she was talking to were, in fact, her killers. One was the one that stabbed her. The other one, panicking, tried to stop the bleeding. There wasn't much. It was a single puncture, and it pierced the ventricle as well as an artery. When that happens, you have a lot of loss of blood, a lot of loss of pressure in the body system. But I believe that his hands were full of blood, and as he ran away as well, the droplets fell in the way that he ran. So it's very important to say, well, Bill, how are you coming to these conclusions, and how do you find this to be the truth? Okay, so here are the theories that I have. That area where the books were fallen and where she was found to have been murdered is an area that has a number of different books. Very close to the area, there was a seat pulled out. There was a half of can of soda that someone had been drinking, and there was books, pornography books on homosexual encounters as well as heterosexual encounters.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
And remember, we're talking about 1969, a conservative town, a conservative university. We have people in those days in the closet because of the type of backlash that people received for being, you know, gay, homosexual. And we know that today that isn't the case. However, there are still people who are very much in the closet. Back then, it was a big thing to be in the closet if you weren't involved because you didn't want it to affect your job, your career, your friends, your family. So what I believe is going on here, and investigators later confirmed this because in between the stacks of books in that section, more than 24 pornography magazines were concealed between the books. There was also semen found in numerous areas in that section. We're talking about a section between 25 to 35 feet. She was right in the hub of this. What I believe happened was, and by the way, one of the investigators said that there was semen everywhere in this area. So it makes me believe that this was an area where students, maybe even, obviously, a number of students who may have been experimenting or could have been gay or homosexual or even heterosexual were using this area for sexual encounters. And I believe that because that particular day, only 90 people visited this library as opposed to 400 people. Remember, this is during the holidays. A lot of people leave campus during this time because of the holidays. It is, as I mentioned before, November the 28th. Not a lot of people on campus. I believe that Betsy, walking to the area, saw something she should not have seen. And what I mean by that is two male individuals.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
And of course, let me call back to continue with my thesis on this particular case, Ken.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, continue on.
Okay, so I was last speaking about what she saw. What I believe she saw was an encounter of a sexual nature, and these two individuals were the ones she was speaking to. They were upset that maybe she would mention it to somebody. This is very awkward. That, no one knew about these guys, or maybe only a very handful of people. And during this conversation with these individuals, she probably led them to believe that maybe she would speak to someone or the campus, or that she felt it was inappropriate what they were doing. Not saying that she did not, she was, anti-gay. It's just that maybe whether it was heterosexual activity or homosexual activity, it was sexual activity in a library, which, well, it's against the rules. So maybe this is it. Or maybe one of them felt that she would mention this. I believe the murder took place because of what she saw. In a panic, one of them pulled out the knife, was upset. He stabbed her once. It took his partner by surprise. He administered what was a feeble attempt, and when he saw that she was bleeding out, he ran away with blood on his hands, and we saw the individual take chase, did not find the guy. Again, that's what I believe happened. This case, I believe, could have been solved from the very beginning had they had the technology we have today. That can of soda would have given us DNA. The droplets of blood, which...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
According to investigators, was the same type of Betsy's blood. So I believe that's what happened there, Ken. I don't believe that this case is that difficult. I think the technology back then probably didn't have the type of insight into these crimes. But this makes what I say a high-risk situation. She stumbled across a high-risk area that she had no idea. It's no different than you and I not understanding the situation. Walk into a drug neighborhood and walk up to a house who's a drug dealer's house and ask to cut the lawn. They believe that we're law enforcement and they shoot us. We're not high risk, but we stumbled into a situation that was high risk. That's what I believe happened to Betsy Aardsma, and unfortunately she lost her life because of it.
Very interesting. Again, I've known of this case a little bit, but never heard anything about homosexual activity. You're talking about the porno stash that was there. I never heard that before either. But again, I haven't researched this case, so I'm glad you ran across that. The DNA on that soda can I had written down here as well, just like you had mentioned, if they still had that can, or even if they took that can, because I'm sure they ran latent, fingerprint techniques over that can back in the day, but you can still get DNA if they still had that. So that is a very plausible scenario, and I think you did a good job on that.
Well, you mentioned the can. They did get a partial print, but it matched no one in the database. And remember, back then there was no database. It was a couple of detectives sitting there looking at it and going through fingerprints of people. And we know that the two individuals who ran away, we don't know who they are. The investigators asked campus people to please come forward if you were those two individuals. Maybe they had information that could lead to the arrest of the actual perps. But the truth is, they were the actual perps. And the reason that those guys did not come forward, because I'm sure after thinking about it, and them being guilty, obviously, they remembered, hey, we were drinking soda right there. That print is ours, or his print. And he knows that if they match that print to him, the magazines, his mind is going, he's thinking, they're going to arrest me. So there's no way he's coming forward. So unless we could find who that individual was and match that print to prints later on in his life or whatever, I don't think we're going to find who this person is. But rest assured, at least in my opinion, the perp who killed her was one of the two gentlemen that were there. And, of course, they had no intention to kill her. This was not their intention. They were in there engaged in whatever relationship that they were in. And she stumbled across it, and that set the events that took place minutes and seconds after that.
Well, don't you think it would make sense that it's more than a possibility, I would say maybe a probability, that she knew one of them, because Penn State is a very big campus. Now, I know November 28th, nobody's there, but still, if she didn't know him, I mean, she may not ever see him again. If she doesn't recognize him, what's it matter if she's seen them engaging in this activity? She can't, it doesn't hurt them. It only hurts one of them if she knows one of them. And then I think the offender would be more likely to be, in a panic-stricken type of mode, right?
No, absolutely. But, this perp is not a professional criminal. He is a student at the university. He is engaged in something that maybe he's ashamed of. He's not ready to come out. And, he's not thinking she could never identify me. But look, the truth is, she could see him passing by in campus 6 months, a year later. If she saw something, as I believe she did, that was very eye-opening or something she's not used to seeing, she's going to remember that guy. So she sees him maybe 6 months later. And, of course, hey, that's the guy. She asks her friend, hey, who is this guy? Well, that name is Billy Bob, Jukinski. And, oh, wow, hey, you know what? I saw him doing this. And there's where rumors start going. And so you were in high school, you went to college, you know that kids love to talk. He could not risk that because there's a very good chance that, look, he's at University of Penn State, costs a lot of money to go there. He may be there in a scholarship. He may be a football player. He may be, a very well-known guy that has aspirations of being a politician or a doctor. In those days, if you were a doctor and they found out you were gay or something, or even an athlete, your career was basically, or worse, if you were a politician or had aspirations to become a political major or something.
Right. Now, all good points. Well taken, for sure. So let me tell you a little tie-in, I think, that I have to this case. It may surprise you. So my first cold case that I worked on, the murder of Don Miller, I got to a point where I got kind of stuck and I didn't know where to turn, so I reached out to the Pennsylvania State Police's cold case unit. And the first one that they sent me, the first trooper they sent me, I got rid of within 20 minutes because he was worthless. I could tell right away he could do nothing to help me. But the second guy that they ended up sending me was from, I believe, the Huntington Barracks. And this guy was good to go. And his name was Dave Aello. And he helped me tremendously with this first cold case. And I believe that he worked on this case, that he took this on. There's got to be something online that confirms this for me, that Dave Aello was the trooper that was working on the Betsy Aardsma case. And if that is true, well, then I kind of have an in, hopefully, to maybe get a peek at those police reports because, just the police reports of crime scene photos are crucial.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Look, you know that you can have the most, largest police force in the world with all the amenities to solving cold cases, and for the most part, all the detectives are very competent. But you have one guy who just, as you saw, can be completely worthless, and he takes on a case like this, and of course, he's overwhelmed, and he just basically walks away from it. But from what I understand, there was a very in-depth investigation done in this case, and actually they had, at one point, they have 3 suspects, and as I mentioned, I had a twist for you on this, and I'm going to actually tell you about the suspects, and then I'm going to name the actual killer of this case, Ken.
Oh,
so,
boy.
Let me hit you with this, okay? So, the first suspect is William Spencer, and he's a 40-year-old sculptor, and he had just recently relocated to Penn State from Boston with his second wife. And he had just gotten there shortly before the Aardsma murder. He was previously the co-founder of Cafe Lena with his first wife in Saratoga Springs, New York. This guy is, he's an artsy guy. He was teaching, or he was trying to obtain teaching credentials as a sculptor at a local college as his wife studied for a PhD. And he actually reported to the police that, he could have been involved, but he also made a confession to one of his co-workers that he killed the girl in the library during a Christmas holiday gathering for facility members. He's an artist. He likes to talk. He even offered to make a bust of the perpetrator who he actually saw, because he says that he was there and that Miss Aardsma, Betsy, had agreed to pose nude for him for extra money. And we know that sometimes these artists end up being the killers, but I think it had more to do with him wanting to create that buzz for the police department and get a bit of notoriety and get himself in the paper, and hopefully, he's helping law enforcement. I think it had more to do with that. And the police quickly dismissed him. That it was just, look, he was nowhere near that place when it happened, and we know that Betsy was, conservative, and the chances of her posing nude are probably 0 to none. So I discounted him right away, and so did the police department. Then we have a guy by the name of Larry Moeller, and he was actually a suspect for a little while. He was a classmate of Betsy, and one of her classmates actually named him as being an acquaintance of her, and that he took her out to coffee one time, and she decided to end the relationship. I think maybe, look, these are kids, they're not perfect. Maybe he came on to her, maybe he was a good-looking guy, she found him attractive, and she decided to end the relationship because she wanted to stay faithful to her boyfriend. And that's actually what this guy said. We don't know if he failed or passed a polygraph test. That is extremely the evidence doesn't show what happened. Those police reports have been misplaced or have never been found again. However, he is blonde, average height. He did not wear glasses, so his appearance is different from what people gave of the person who was actually involved. And, I doubt that this guy was it. This guy, again, he was a little different. He kind of gave the impression that he was, in fact, very close to Betsy. Again, people...
You have 60 seconds remaining.
This guy strikes me as just another kid that wasn't really involved. So let me call back and really then give you who I believe is actually the killer of Betsy Aardsma.
Okay.
Okay, my final suspect, and who I believe committed this crime, is Richard Hefner. No relation to Hugh Hefner, nonetheless a Hefner. And I may be pronouncing it incorrectly, but that's his name. So, the reason I believe that this guy really is the killer is because authors, as well as a number of different people, actually find him to be a vital suspect for a number of reasons. And I'll give you my take as opposed to what they think. So first of all, he was a Penn State professor. And he was 25 years old. And he's also a geology student at the university. So this guy was the classic guy. He was respected by his peers, but it was awkward. He did a lot of things to obtain platonic relationships with women, including dating them to cover the fact that he was homosexual. On one occasion, he was even known to have traveled from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts to inform a girl that he barely knew that he loved her. Of course, she slammed the door in his face and didn't know what the heck this guy was coming from. But that is classic behavior of a person who is strongly trying to show people that he's straight, that he has relationships with women, and to cover the fact that he is actually homosexual. He actually lived across the courtyard from Atherton Hall, where Miss Aardsma was actually, at the time of her death, that's where she actually resided. And they knew each other. He was known to have erotic behavior sometimes, including bursts of explosive anger. He was suspected in the theft of a lot of small items from the but of the specimens of rocks and mineral collections at the university. He was known to wear khaki trousers and sport coats. He had a brown hair. He was kept short. And just prior to Miss Aardsma's murder, she terminated the relationship between the two because they knew each other. So obviously, she knew this guy. Again, now we're flashing back to what I said prior to this, and you mentioned, well, they may not ever see each other. She knew this guy.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
So, yes. So this guy fits everything what we're talking about. But here's the part that really catches me. A few years later, in 1975, two boys who worked at Hefner's rock shop, they separately accused him of molesting them. And he went to trial for it, but there was a hung jury. There was a bunch of different lawsuits filed against them because of these particular cases, and he actually won a lawsuit to take these things off of his record pertaining to the arrest. Several years later, his mother actually had an issue with them, and she mentioned, it was overheard, and she says that that's what led to you killing that girl. That is, and now you're killing me. And they were talking about his relationships. Now, he was supposedly involved with mentioning to someone something to the extent, have you heard? A girl I dated was murdered in the library. And these accounts contradict what he told the officials when they interviewed him about his whereabouts that night. all of these things that I'm talking about here, and we can talk about it more in depth, suggest exactly what I believe happened. He was involved in some type of sexual encounter with a partner. Betsy saw it. He immediately came up to her, started speaking to her, convincing her, look, you didn't see what you thought you saw, or please don't mention this to anybody. There may have been already some animosity because she had terminated the relationship with him, and now she sees this. He was agitated. He was known to have an explosive temper. He believed that she would out him. He pulls out a knife, kills her. His partner, whoever the man was, young man, tried to apply some kind of CPR, realized he couldn't. He ran off. And then, of course, he's arrested for child molestation, which were boys, by the way. It wasn't, a pedophile of young girls. They were boys. So it validates my theory that it was homosexual encounter. This area was used for these encounters. Maybe it was known to other people in this particular small society at the university, and Betsy stumbled across it, and this caused, ultimately, her murder. So in my opinion, Richard Hefner is the perpetrator who murdered Betsy Aardsma.
Okay, well, that's pretty specific. I can get behind your theory. I just wouldn't, I won't go as far as saying, yeah, I agree with you, because I don't like naming names of anybody, especially when I haven't done my own research on it. But he certainly seems that he could fit this scenario. So you got me intrigued now. Now I'm going to have to go up to Pattee Library, go between the stacks, what was it, 51 and 53 or something like that, and do some filming, and hopefully get in touch with Dave Aello and see if he would be kind enough to share any police reports or crime scene photos with me so I can investigate this one further.
Yeah, and interesting enough, Ken, this guy Hefner, he later died alone in a hospital bathroom in March of 2002. And his cause of death, ironically enough, was a tear to his aorta, which bled into his lungs, which was a similar manner of death that his victim, Betsy, endured before she died.
Wow. Well, if it was him, that certainly is karma, huh? Yeah,
karma seems to follow folks sometimes, but as I mentioned, there is a number of other different reasons, and one of them was one of his nephews as well. He divulged that also on one occasion he overheard a heated argument between Hefner and his mother, and there was a lot of accusations leveled at Hefner by his mother, and he said, again, his mother told him that this behavior was led to you killing that girl. And his own nephew overheard that, which was reported to police. And as I mentioned, he later died. They never charged him with the murder, although I wish they would have. I'd like to ask investigators where that can is.
Right.
That would be the first thing. Where is that can? And if it isn't his DNA, let's find out whose it is, and then ask that person what he saw that night.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
And ask that individual, was he the second person in that library, and then what he saw. And I'm sure that if the person's being honest, it would lead us back to Hefner.
Did you research anything about Hefner's father? Because it seems like it could be a domineering mother type situation where his father died or left him.
I did not. I found very little, if anything, related to Hefner's father. It was always his mother, so I don't know. That would be a good question, but I don't know.
Okay. Well, give me something to research when it comes the time to look at this case more in depth.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else about this case? Again, it was very, very good with the porno books. I never knew that. The soda can, the DNA off of that, I had that written down, obviously. The blood drops. I didn't realize there were blood drops leading from the scene as well. That'll be good to know when I go up there to Pattee Library to try to kind of track the route that the offender ran. And you said it was down the steps. Am I correct?
Well, it was down some steps, yes. I mean, it could have been leading upward, but the investigators said the perp ran in that direction, so immediately they thought that there was the guy that they chased may have not been the perpetrator. But I believe, in fact, it could have been either one of them. I don't know which one was actually the perpetrator. They're both involved. One ran off. But obviously, one of them had blood. My theory was that the other one, not knowing what his partner was going to do, and then panicked and tried to stop the bleeding, and he got his hands full of blood, and he ran off. I would love to hear your input once you research this carefully. I obviously don't have the facilities to look at this case in depth through, obviously, an investigator who actually took a look at this case and looked at the files, because I'm sure it would add new twists and turns. But from what I can read, this is what I believe happened in this case.
I'm curious about those blood drops and how, because obviously you're going to have a knife of some sort. And if he doesn't sheath, I guess, that knife or put it back into his pocket, somebody would have seen that, him running out with a knife. But you're saying that you think more than likely it was because it was not the offender, it was someone else who tried to render assistance to Betsy, right?
Well, it could be. I mean, again, this is where I have a problem with the clanking of metal, like the blade actually hit the floor. I would like to see the crime scene. However, here's the biggest problem with this crime scene, Ken. I know you're going to sit there and you're going to go, oh my God, you're kidding me, right? So, remember, when she was found and a call was made to the hospital center, the initial report was a young woman has fainted. Well, and then she urinated. When they took her, the library staff instructed the janitors to clean the area completely, as well as restack the books. Now, that's a huge problem for me, because they didn't know that she had been stabbed, so she arrived at the hospital center a few minutes later. So they actually destroyed the crime scene. If there was a blade, because someone said they saw something clank and it fell over, someone could have very easily have picked it up, stuck it in their pocket, and left. That's one clue. They also cleaned everything that was there. There could have been blood droplets there because the perpetrator cut himself when he stabbed her, and those droplets were also picked up. So this crime scene is going to frustrate you because there's nothing there. They basically destroyed the entire scene.
Yeah, that's not surprising, especially for that time frame, I guess. What I'm trying to wrap my brain around is the offender having a knife. Now, if he's a clean-cut professor type
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Professor type of guy, what's his need to carry a knife? You know what I mean? Can you answer that when we come back?
Sure.
All right.
I definitely will.
Okay.
And I'll be right back. Okay.
All right. So, yeah, again, my thought goes to the offender. Now, I know he's, in your scenario, he is participating in an act of which he probably is kind of nervous about. He may be meeting somebody that he doesn't know well, and I guess that could be a reason to carry a knife, or maybe he carried one at all times. But if he's wearing a sports jacket and he's dressed nice and groomed nice, having a knife on you just doesn't fit to me unless you are intending to have trouble of some sort.
Yeah, you would be quite right, and that's one thing I thought about. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to me. So, again, it goes back to Hefner. What does he do for a living? He's a professor, so people say, well, why would he have a knife? Well, the reason he would have a knife is because he's a rock specialist. He has a rock shop. And rock shop people usually carry some type of tool to play with a thing, open a rock, scrape a knife. And he could have been a Boy Scout at one point, and Boy Scouts usually carry knives. I'm not the kind of guy who carries a knife, but I know a lot of kids in high school, junior high school, that carried a knife, and they were not criminals. They had a knife on them, a small pocket knife, some type of knife. It could have been a buck knife that opens up. I'm not sure. But it doesn't strike me as that strange that a rock specialist, a person dealing with rocks all the time, would have a tool such as a knife on him, especially if he's a professor and he's showing students rocks. He's demonstrating, pointing with the knife. He is scraping the top of the surface of the knife, a possible a rock with limestone or covered in different type of granite, or he's exposing the veins of the granite by scraping the knife. Doesn't strike me as that strange. Now, had we had the technology today, we could have seen and we could have tested the blood. There seems to have been a spray of droplets, like someone flicked his hand at the crime scene. Those droplets could have been tested. They said the droplets leading down from the initial crime scene had, in fact, the type of blood matched Betsy, but they could not take DNA because DNA didn't exist then. So all they could tell you was it was the same type of blood as Betsy, but we know that you could go into a room of 40 people and 25 people have your same blood type. So maybe the blood was not, in fact, Betsy's. It could have been the perpetrator who actually ran that way and his partner ran the way. I'm not sure which one of them was which, but I thought, my theory was that possibly the other young man tried to perform CPR and he got blood on his hands. He realized nothing was going. He ran. And the droplets of blood came from Betsy, especially because it matched her blood type. But without DNA evidence, without sophisticated technology of evidence gathering of today, I can't be sure.
Yeah, I would tend to believe that the offender did not cut himself if she was only stabbed one time. Because normally you get stabbed in a struggle, or if you get blood on the handle or on your hand and your hand slips and goes down on the blade. But if you're only stabbed once, I don't see that the offender would have cut himself. Do you agree?
Yeah, you're quite right. Like the case of the Idaho murder, sure, the guy was multiple stabbing. There could be where his hand becomes slick with blood, and he cuts himself. One stab wound, yeah, that would be. It's not unheard of, but it's not plausible. I mean, not probable.
Right. Yeah. And the difference in the Idaho, of course, as we know, that was premeditated. So more than likely the guy wore gloves, whereas this was not premeditated. But you got to factor in the weather probably. I mean, November 28th in Pittsburgh, I bet you if we looked up the weather at that time, it was below 30 degrees. So the offender could have had gloves on then as well. It's probably possible.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Yes, that's very possible, but they're inside of a library and this individual is engaged in what I believe is a sexual act. So to have gloves on, I doubt he did because of that fact. Again, these are just things that you and I are sitting around a round table talking about this, and we're putting in both of our 2 cents. But yeah, I don't think he had gloves on, although he probably had some in his pockets.
Right, yeah. Yeah, a lot to get into with this case for sure, and now my mind's spinning, of course, and I'll have to do some more research and stuff when I get off the phone here with you and wrap this up. But anything else going on? Any last thoughts you want to give on this case or anything else?
Only that I would love to hear your take on what you believe happened, especially if you speak to the detective. that was involved in this case, and he gives you some insight, because I would love to hear how he feels about it and what really your expertise on this case, because this case really interests me, not only because it's Penn State and a school that I really follow, but because of how this case was handled, the mistakes they made. Obviously not law enforcement's fault that they cleaned the crime scene, but really just I'm curious about the case itself, because it's very unfortunate that Betsy Aardsma lost her life because of something I believe she saw, and I'm just very curious about this case.
Yeah, well, I do this new show called Exit Unsolved, where, myself or part of my team will travel to areas and conduct, a small investigation, talk to the police, talk to the family members, go back to the crime scene always, and get it out there so, people, this show's seen by, 500,000 people. So, I mean, who knows what someone's going to see and can report forward. So this might be a good next show for my Exit Unsolved, and we'll revisit it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, the case is, it's 50 plus years old. Hefner's dead. So if someone knows about something and it happens to confirm what we're talking about here, that it was Hefner, look, no foul on talking about what really happened and what you knew. If you're the other person that was there, and I'm correct, and they tried to stop and help CPR, give CPR to the young lady, please come forward, speak up, tell what really happened. I'm sure that Betsy's family, her siblings, I don't know if her parents are still alive, but they would definitely want to know what happened to their sister, as well as society at large, because this is a case that's been unsolved. It's been featured in a number of different articles. It's been covered in a number of different books by authors, and of course here on Unsolved No More.
Yeah, of course. All right, well, that's it. Bill, final words?
Well, just that I appreciate you having me on the show. I would encourage listeners to subscribe to my newsletter at artistwilliamnoguera.com, or you can find a link on
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Ken's YouTube page, and of course, I now have a YouTube channel as well. It's called Through the Lens of a Monster, of course, under William A. Noguera, and it kind of covers what I've done over the past few years, and kind of a one-place info center, which is getting built, so give it a little time, but I'd appreciate if you subscribe and follow. So I'd appreciate that.
And the YouTube channel, again, is called what?
It's under William A. Noguera, of course, my name, and it's called Through the Lens of a Monster.
Through the Lens of a Monster. All right, I'll make sure that those guys know that. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me again today.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. Thank you so much, and have a great week, and we'll definitely talk again soon.
Okay. All right, what'd you think of that? Bill has some pretty strong thoughts on this case. A lot of theories that I did not know about. And I'm going to have to really dig into this now because of the porno section, the magazines being stashed there. I've never heard that. That's very interesting. Of course, maybe I wouldn't have heard that because I was, 10, 12 years old when I was starting to show interest in these cold cases and knew about this case. So maybe that was one of the things that was obviously kept away from me. The blood drops I've written down here. That's very interesting. I knew kind of about the type of person that they were looking for. But Bill, I never knew about the homosexual angle to this. Never knew of that. So that's something I definitely got to look into. I always assumed, and you know what happens when you assume, that it was like a jilted lover or a stalking situation. But as I got older, looking at it, I kind of shied away from that because of the one stab wound. If it's a crime of passion, for the most part, you're going to have multiple stab wounds. Remember, I don't get into overkill, but multiple stab wounds, not just a single. So that always stuck with me the older I got. I talked about the trooper that helped me in my Don Miller case. I believe he took over this case. So when it comes time for me to do probably an exit unsolved on Betsy's case, I certainly would like to speak with him and hope that he would share some of those records with me, at least the crime scene photos, so I can do a crime scene assessment and help this case. I had talked, when he started talking about the homosexual angle, I had interjected and said, well, wouldn't it make more sense? Wouldn't it be more probable that she knew one of those guys? And then I think he initially said, well, no. But then towards the end, when he gave his suspect, he came around to that. And he's like, she knew him. Now, I won't name a suspect. I've never done that, and I never will. Because unless I'm 100%, and I got to be 100, not 99, I just feel that it's wrong to a person to state them publicly as a suspect in a murder when maybe they're innocent. You know what I mean? Now, if they're convicted, that's a different story. But he went and named this Hefner person, and even though they're dead, he's dead, that person still has relatives and siblings, and maybe he is completely innocent, and people put out their name. I don't like that. I don't like when authors do that, when they make a claim for a book. Well, my dad, well, that's a bad example, but still, my dad is the Zodiac killer. Stuff like that. There's other people in that family that it hurts, that they don't believe it, but you're going to do it. I learned my lesson about writing about people in a book I wrote about football, about my high school football team called Glory Boys. Go to Amazon, look it up. To me, best work I ever did in writing a book. The most enjoyable, the most prideful moment in me in writing a book. Because it was about my friends. And I had chapters in there for, I think, 5 of my good friends. And 3 out of the 5 didn't like it. Didn't like what I wrote about them. Even though I was very careful. I would point out maybe a bad thing that was honest that maybe they had done or something. But 99% of it was good stuff. But they latched onto that one bad thing. Why did you have to write about that? And now I look back and I feel horrible. So I learned my lesson from it. And I won't do it again. Even though it was certainly the truth, maybe I was wrong, So I learned that, and I won't do that in this channel either. The time of day stuck out to me, 4:30 in the afternoon. I have to look into Bill's theory a little bit more. I'm going to have to research this case a little bit more. If there's any relatives or authors that have watched or are watching this and you want to be a part of the Betsy Aardsma documentary type of show that I am doing called Exit Unsolved, please get a hold of me. We'll set up interviews. And we'll look into this case and we'll dive into it deeper. And let's get to the bottom of it. And I'll see if my theories agree or disagree with what Bill Noguera said. Sounded plausible. But I'm not going to agree or disagree right now because I don't know enough about it, about the case. I have to dig into it. But for what he said, very plausible. So, with that said, hey, thanks for watching this edition of Redemption from Death Row. And please keep tuning in. Share this with your friends. I've never, ever, in, 200-something videos that I've done, said like and subscribe because I'll never do that. But if you enjoy this content, share it with your friends. Or just keep coming back. I got comments turned off because I don't live my life by comments. I don't I don't even like Amazon comments, okay? I just do this because I enjoy doing it. And I believe it's a gift I have a passion for. So the following has grown. We're over 105,000, I think, subscribers, and people watch. And maybe this can help somebody solve a case and get resolution for their families. That's the hope. So thanks for watching. Mains out.